My name is Schmidt. We're here with César Medina Maldonado. It's April 3rd, 2024. We're at the Nicholson Library, Linfield University in McMinnville. César, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
And the first question, get things started, is why wine?
Boy, life is a goofy thing. I would have never thought it would be wine. I think a younger version of me would look at 35 going on 36-year-old me and would have a laugh and would have thought, no way. I think the younger version of me would have probably thought the current me is amusing, maybe fun, maybe cool, but I don't know. I was born in a small island in the Caribbean, so definitely not wine country. Puerto Rico, to be specific. And I didn't grow up around wine. It wasn't necessarily a focal point. But life sometimes takes you in directions. And you could think of it as being like a leaf in a stream, sort of letting yourself be carried along. But I do believe in being a protagonist in your life. And sometimes you see where the stream is taking you, and you can either latch onto a rock, try to get out, or you can go full steam ahead into that direction. You know, my story with wine is not always one that was easy, one that was comfortable, one that was always happy. A lot of my core memories around wine are kind of sad times in my life. But it's always managed to be there. Mm-hmm. And if anything, my life has been about reinventing myself. And I think that in a medium such as wine, where by and large we talk about wines with a vintage date and with a story to tell, I think that is humanly poetic, I guess, for what is, you know, at the same time, it's a commodity good. Let's not kid ourselves. So, how do I get into wine? Having said all of that about where I came from and why wine maybe wouldn't have seemed like the first obvious thing. Being a millennial, I went through a couple of big things. Relatively normal, quiet childhood, followed by a couple of era-defining moments like 9/11, the 2008 recession, the pandemic, and the lockdown of 2020. Those three things all play really big roles into how we get to where we are today. First, 9/11, obviously that shook the world, that changed everything. My father worked a job where he traveled a lot. We really didn't see him very much. He was only home on the weekends. And he was in the air that day. And I remember I was in 8th grade, just really panicking about that. And I had this feeling like, well, don't want to do that for a living. Don't want to be in the air for a living. And I graduated from college. I had a bachelor's in audio design and production. I went to a fine arts school in Chicago. In 2010, in the middle of the 2008 recession. There was no work. So I found myself working at a bookstore, and I found myself working serving coffees. And there was this real ennui at the time. There was this real feeling that something was wrong and amiss. And that started off what I would call sort of my wilderness years, my 20s. I was first in the bookstore, then the coffee. Then I was, for a year and a half, working a 9-to-5 office job at a data entry clerk at a mortgage company. I hated it. Spent the whole time on Google Images looking at places that I wished I could afford to travel to or restaurants that I wished I could eat at. And I remember discovering the world's 50 best restaurants list at that time and feeling so fired up about the world and just how much more there was to life than, at that time, living in Chicago's suburbs. I went to school in the city, but at that time I was seeing someone who was based in the suburbs. We were living together, and we would go on to be married. And we were together for 7 years, which includes 1 year of being married. So that is a really big part of my story, is being divorced by the time I was 30. In that family, we didn't always get along between my in-laws and myself. I mean, there wasn't antipathy, but I don't know. It was always kind of sort of sniffing each other out, never really quite knowing what to do with one another. And my ex-wife had an uncle who loved wine. And at dinner parties, whether it was Thanksgiving or Christmas or what have you, Uncle Mike would pull me aside, and he would have this sort of mischievous twinkle in his eyes. And he would say, "Hey kid, do you want to try Merlot from Washington?" And, it was a grocery store brand. But I would say, "Hey, this tastes different from the Malbec that we had last time." Or, "Hey, this is appreciably different from the Carmenere that we had the last time." Or he would pull out something called Nero d'Avola from Sicily, and we'd ooh and ah, sort of apart and away from everybody else who would be going through the same family stories that they would always say, this sort of family tradition of the ritual of going through their own oral histories, right? Mm-hmm. But he and I sort of formed a little friendship around that. Now, around that time, I knew that I couldn't stay at the mortgage job, and I loved cooking. I loved food. And it made me feel like in this tumultuous time in my life where I really didn't have a lot of control, that it was something I could do. So my friends urged me to give it a try. So I left that office job that did pay the bills to go cook, which, if anyone in your audience has ever worked as a line cook, will tell you most certainly does not pay the bills. My mother likes to say that I learned things the hard way. Mm-hmm. Damn, if that's not true, huh? So I cooked a series of different restaurants in Chicago. We moved back into the city. This was before we got married, so I know that the timeline's maybe a little bit jumbled as I jump around here. But, we moved to the city. I started cooking, and while I felt that I had a talent or a knack for it, is probably a better word, I certainly enjoyed it. I liked the colorful people that I would work with. I mean, you would meet people from every walk of life, from such different backgrounds, economically, socially, geographically, that, for me, so much of my life, coming from Puerto Rico and then landing in the suburbs of Chicago, Illinois, when I was 13 years old, I mean, I had nothing in common with a lot of these kids. And even with other Spanish speakers, I was just like, hey, the other kids, most of them would be, Central American origin or Mexican American origin, and they'd be like, hey, you talk different. Like, do you even really speak Spanish? And I'd be like, I don't know, do I? And it would really, really mess with me. So suddenly I found that I had this sense of community, and I kind of had this little bit of my, for lack of a better word, my tribe, right? Forgive me. But I felt like I belonged in this little group of misfits that was a restaurant kitchen. And I would spend some time at one, some time in another, learning different skills, and I would start to have this fantasy of maybe having a restaurant one day. But eventually my career stalled out. And this was around the time that we got married, which is now approaching the end of my 20s, the end of the wilderness years. And I had been working as a sous chef at a Greek restaurant for, in the end, it was almost 4 years. At that restaurant, there was no progressing because the owner the chef was the owner. I mean, you're not going to take over for him. He had guys who had been in place for 17 years with him. I mean, it was what it was. And I would go out and I'd try my hand at different restaurants, and I would fall on my face. I just didn't have the skills that I needed to hack at these Michelin restaurants. I would stage at them, and the chefs would get red in the face, and they'd be an inch from their noses from mine, and they'd say, "You don't know how to cut a potato. You don't know how to cut a square. Go home and take these apples and cut them into a square until you can come back and do it right." But at the Greek place, they didn't have those qualms. It was more like, well, does it taste good? Does it look right? Well, get it out there. I need it yesterday. So I started exploring other avenues to make more money while still being in the restaurant industry. And I wanted to go to culinary school. I got accepted. I was getting ready to go. But it fell through. There were issues with my relationship that were impeding that, and we already weren't seeing eye to eye about where we wanted to be, where we wanted to spend our time. I was feeling really burnt out on the big city life and in Chicago, and I had been held up by a coworker. Oh, what a nice memory. If I think about it, I can still feel like the cold steel on my chest of the gun. Good times.
Terrifying.
So I didn't really want to stay in Chicago, but I did want to keep cooking, and eventually we knew that the culinary school option wasn't realistic. So I looked at these chefs that I admired from around the world, from maybe Chile, Argentina, Peru, maybe France, Italy, Spain. And for the ones who didn't go to school and get a formal classic education, they seemed to know something about wine. And wine was fun. Wine was a diversion. And I thought, well, you know what? I can definitely apply the skills that I've been building with regards to my palate to wine. Maybe there's something to that. Maybe I can pick up a book and maybe get a bottle every now and again, and it won't cost as much as college tuition. I don't even want to know what it is today in 2024. But I thought this was an option. So I picked up a book. I picked up a book called The Wine Bible, the second edition, written by Miss Karen McNeil. And it changed my life. She, I think, was, if not a travel writer, a food writer before she went into wine, or certainly had some experience in it. And you could tell. I was somebody who wanted to travel and see the world. I was somebody who wanted to taste the world. And all of a sudden, going through these pages, you would go through the chapter on, say, Greece. And she just got done describing the difference between Malagousia, Assyrtiko, Agiogitiko, Xinomavro. And, oh yeah, this is what they would eat in Crete to go along with that lovely Vidiano that you're having. And I could just taste it. I could just taste it in my mind's eye, so to speak, or my mind's palate. And it felt good. It felt right. So this happens at the time that we started separating. That sucked. That really sucked. You don't go into a marriage, even a marriage that only lasts a year, from how tumultuous it was. You don't go into a marriage thinking this will not last. I had tattooed a ring on my finger. Voila. It's a big part of my story too. And, people say, just to sort of get the point about the tattoo out of the way, people say, when you're older, how will those tattoos look? It's not about how they look when you're older. It's about who you were at the time that you got it. It's a souvenir of you, on you. And if who you were was somebody who thought that, the Tasmanian devil on your neck was the thing to immortalize that moment with for the rest of your life, then good on you, man. That is who you are. You made that choice. And I may be a little bit naive, I may be a little bit of a romantic, but you go into a marriage expecting it to last a lifetime. And a tattoo will theoretically last the lifetime, and it's still with me. And that divorce is still with me. But in a different way. Wounds eventually heal and eventually take different forms. When you're with someone for 7 years, your friend groups tend to mesh and meld together. And in the divorce, I sort of shrank into my shell. I was very ashamed that the marriage didn't last longer. And it was really difficult to talk about when people would ask me, hey, how are things at home with the new missus? Which is fine. But I needed an escape. Wine. And I needed new friends. So, for whatever reason, I convinced myself to take some of the exams with the quartermaster sommeliers. And so this would have been 2017, April of 2017, and I took the intro course in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Passed it, and feeling quite chuffed about it. Felt like, at long last, a small win, right? I went back to Chicago and started sort of piecing together and strategizing what my life would look like as my divorce was being hashed out between lawyers, and just sort of doing that slow march towards the end. And I was invited to a trade tasting in Chicago, and here I am, a recently single divorcee. And there was a beautiful woman behind the stand for one of the Rioja wines. And I'm sort of chatting her up, professional, but chatting, just sort of talking. And this guy comes up to me, really big personality. This guy, kind of fiendish, twitchy fella, comes up to me to the left, and he picks up the glass of wine and he swirls it and swirls it and swirls it. And he goes, is there any oak in this? I mean, I can never tell. And I looked at him and I said, it's a Rioja. It says Gran Reserva. And I was like, this sort of playful banter felt really good. And, you know, talking with the host and with this guy, it felt really right in a way that things hadn't before. And, you know, stepped outside at the end of the tasting, and I was talking with some of my group that I'd gone there with, and this guy finds me and he goes, hey, you know more about wine than the average bear. And I said, well, I don't think that's true. He goes, no, have you done any of these like quartermasters things? And I said, yeah, actually, I just passed the intro course. And he goes, well, here's the deal. I'm putting together a group of people studying for the level 2, and I need you to be there. I said, you're a lunatic. He says, no, I need you to be there. Here's my number. Please come. And I met the most incredible people. I met the most incredible, driven, passionate people who were protagonists in their lives. And I admired them, and I liked them, and I liked their stories, and I liked the way they talked about wine. And I felt like these people got me and wanted me to succeed and pushed me to do exactly that, to succeed. I was very emboldened. I went on to take the exam. I didn't think I passed. I almost took the Master Som's eye out in the champagne service. So I don't know, maybe I should have failed. But I passed. I passed on the first try, which feels nice that I didn't have to redo that. Don't know if I have the stomach for trying again. But I passed, and it left me with these big questions about my career. Do I keep cooking, or do I go serve wine somewhere? The months go by, the divorce is finalized, I'm seeing someone else, I'm living somewhere else. Things are starting to feel a little bit better. And I got a phone call from my uncle, and he says, I'm going to California to celebrate my 50th with your dad, and we want to go to Napa, and you're a sommelier, right? And I was like, I mean, I don't work as a sommelier, but I have the pin, I have the piece of paper. And he was like, right. I just broke up with my girlfriend, and I have an extra seat for this, that, and the third, and I want you to come. And I said, okay. And he goes, the only thing you got to do is you got to make the arrangements for where we're going to taste and what we're going to see and what we're going to do. Okay, deal. We got to Napa, and he rents the car. We hung out with my parents for a couple of days. My parents go home. And then he says, do you want to keep going? I said, yes. He said, where do you want to go? I said, I want to go to the Willamette Valley. He says, why? And I said, I just have a feeling about it. These were wines that as I'd been learning about wines for the exam, I felt like the Willamette Valley, on a timeline sort of scale, was in a place in the late teens, right? So like 2018, October 2018 is when I first came here. That made me think a lot of what I was reading about, say, like Napa Sonoma in the 80s and early 90s, right? Definitely there was an alpha grape. Definitely there was a style associated with it. Definitely not an unknown, but for people who would go and visit it, they would find that there was significantly more going on than just, the Hollywood grape. That's kind of funny, Hollywood grape. So we went. And Mr. Brian at Belle Pont was kind enough to host us for a tasting. And I was so inspired. I felt so alive after being to his farm and seeing his dog, his geese, his ducks, his goats, his vines. We were there in October, so it was, things were fermenting still. I remember he still had some of his Gamay fermenting with, I think they were like bed sheets over the top. And he had some Riesling coming in. I think it was the last day or so. He had some botrytized berries in a 5-gallon bucket, and he invited us to try it. And it was like the stars aligned, and it felt so good. My uncle keyed in on that, and on the drive to the hotel that night, or to the Airbnb, whatever it was, he says, you know what I need from you? I need you to move to Oregon. And I said, yeah, me and what money? He goes, I have never seen you so lit up, so passionate, so focused, so driven, so clear in your ideas. I can't stand to see you in the mud anymore. Mm-hmm. And so between him and my folks, they lent me some money, which was incredibly generous of them. And I moved out here in, March of 2019. And so, then we start having these sort of anniversaries that ring in our head, like March 13th of 2019 was when I got my keys to my first apartment in Newburgh. And I was cooking, but I was also starting to work in wine. And, in the process, I was like, I got this damn pin, and I'm not doing anything with it. And the idea was that I was supposed to be making more money by not cooking. So I went to cook at the Allison Inn and Spa, where I was working for 5 days a week at the Jory restaurant. I made wonderful friends there. And then I moved on to, not moved on quite yet, but I expanded into working on my days off at Domaine Drouin, or for the international audience, Domaine Drouin. It's funny, you work for the family out here, and out here we're so used to calling them the Drouin family, that then when you're like out and about into the broader world, right, and you say Drouin, they sort of look at you like, did you really work for them? You're mispronouncing their name, and you're like, no, it's like me saying Caesar instead of César, right? It's sort of a funny thing, but yeah, so the Drouin family were were my employers for a couple of years. And I started off in the tasting room there, which was an amazing experience. You know, getting to talk to people about wine. This thing that, to me, I felt had kind of saved my life in a way, had sort of redefined me, or been a rock, something that I could tuck myself into and just read about and learn about and immerse myself in. It had really provided me a lot of solace and comfort. So to be able to then share what I felt was real love for what we were talking about and what made me fall in love with it with people, man, that was special. That was great. And I was working for a great family. The ability to talk about the wines from Burgundy as well was a humongous plus. Those wines, broadly speaking, Burgundy is one of the most expensive categories in the world. I hate using that word, categories. Doesn't that feel like so corporate? Oh, yes, this winery is a wonderful portfolio. No, but, you know, there's such a thing as commodity wine. And then there's such a thing as artisan wine, and we'll talk about that in a second. But, yeah, so I got access to Burgundy. And the ability to really, really get it in my skin and my bones, the whole Côte d'Or thing, and understanding the concept of terroir, right? Taste of place. And there was no turning back after that. When the pandemic finally came, the family, the owners were generous enough to, you know, usually they would invite temp workers to come in and help out with things like, you know, the less glamorous stuff, bottling, packaging, etc. And they said, well, to our tasting room staff, even the guys who are part-time, we have hours. You'll have to wear a mask, but, you know, we'll have something for you to do if you guys really want to get out of the house and do some work. I jumped at the chance, man. I couldn't stand being stuck in my house. I thought I would teach myself Portuguese, only a little bit. I tried getting myself into gardening. That was successful. I really enjoyed gardening. I'd never done it before, which is a very funny thing looking at it now, 4 years later. And yeah, so they noticed my work ethic, and they seemed to like that I didn't complain about metaphorically eating shit and working on my feet and throwing my back into it and working hard and sweating for my money. And in 2021, the opportunity came about to help out with the harvest team. So I seized it with both hands. And I felt like, I like working in flavor. I've worked as a bread baker once upon a time. I knew about fermentations. And this is my opportunity to go from being a bystander and be a participant, even on a small scale. And I really sank my teeth into that. I really felt so alive. And there are some pictures, and even I can't believe how happy I look in those pictures. And it really lit that fire. If there had been embers going and little sparks before, by then there was no turning back. And by then, early 30s, I'm thinking, there's no time to waste. I need to make this count. And I've reinvented myself so many times that this one has to count. They have to start sticking. So, what do you know? I end up working full-time at DDO, at Domaine Drouin, Oregon, and left my job at the restaurant completely. Did a little bit of catering on the side here and there, just to help pay the bills a bit. And my relationship with the Drouin family professionally, anyway, ended in September of last year, 2023, on good terms. Definitely, it wasn't a breakup. It was like, let's say friends. And that was when I followed the opportunity to do harvest in Spain. One of my very, very particularly favorite grapes is Albarino. Whether you spell it the Portuguese way or the Spanish way doesn't much matter to me, but it's a very special grape to me. And in 2023, I was able to participate as an enology intern at Bodegas Gran Bazán from the Rías Baixas, the bit of Galicia that obviously is so famous for making Albarino, and in the Salnes Valley, no less. And when I came back from that, there really, really was no turning back. There was no, yeah, let's go, work in a tasting room. At this stage, it just felt so irrelevant. I know that sounds stupid, but it felt like, at that stage for me to not pursue this, it felt like salmon swimming upstream. Like, instead of just sort of going with the flow of which way my life was wanting to go, and is in that certain direction, and just saying, like, just take the momentum and build on it. That more or less catches you up to 2024. There are a couple of big things that happened along the way. The biggest one probably is that March 15th, another anniversary of 2023, I had a really big accident. I fell off a ladder about 10 feet up, and I fell in a sitting position on concrete, and I broke 3 bones in my back. I wasn't on, I wasn't bedridden, but I was on bed rest for a couple weeks. There was definitely some, not quite army crawling, but clutching the walls by my nails just to go to the bathroom. I'm an adult with ADHD. I wasn't diagnosed until my late 30s. It's a pretty recent thing. So I need to move around. I need to keep busy, or I go crazy, And here, all of a sudden, life had put the kibosh on all that movement that I was building up to. And this was before my harvest to Spain, which I had, on paper, already agreed to do. Mm-hmm. Things are moving. I'm panicking. Am I even going to make it to this harvest? Is my dream in peril? And it was very much in peril. I couldn't work for months. But the brain doesn't stop going, does it? And you start thinking to yourself, you must find purpose in this. You must find meaning in this. I don't think it's a cliche when you listen to people, especially from the Willamette Valley, who have been there, done this before me, that so many of them use the word community. And without question, my community came and supported me during this time. Dog walks, cookies, books, just checking in. Incredibly moving stuff. Incredibly grateful to all of them. One friend in particular, Jody Petit, handed me a book written by Ryan Halliday about Marcus Aurelius and Stoicism, which I am not a Stoic. I am a giant, bubbling, weepy, emotional person. I high five and I hug, and despite how I'm trying to present composed for you right now, I'm really a pretty effusive, extroverted person. I need human contact, where I start to feel really, isolated. And so he gave me this book called The Obstacle is the Way. Boy, that book, that mentality, I have fallen in the shit. I don't know if I can say that word. Can I say that word?
Absolutely.
Great. So how do you get yourself out? How do you make the shit work for you? Well, here I am, stuck in bed with my books and my laptop, having had, I don't know if it was a near-death experience, but a near paralysis experience, a pretty big scare. And thinking about the future, and how many more second chances am I going to get? I don't know. I've gotten a lot. And I feel like I'm always sort of riding that razor. So how am I going to make this count? Started talking to my family. I started talking to other people about, things are getting really expensive out here. Really, really, really expensive out here. And is it too late? Have we been priced out on land? Oh, probably. And, a lot of these I think are just common millennial themes, but let's run with it. Let's pretend they're unique. So we start looking at sort of virgin land that's for sale on all the different real estate pages. And that's affordable, but hold up. If we take this virgin land, let's say that we spent $500,000 on 20 acres, right? Well, let's plant 10 of those acres. All right, you're going to be spending between $35,000 and $50,000 an acre to plant that, all in, for 5 years. That's 5 years you're going to be sitting on that land, just looking at those grapes, tending to them, working on them, with zero return. That's a big leap of faith. But wine is often a leap of faith. Then it said, well, hold on a minute. What if we want to vinify this? What if we want to take our own fruit and turn that into wine? Oh, well, sure. Let's say I planted Albarino. I want to do like a Vinho Verde style. I'm going to get this thing out in 6 to 8 months after fermentation. Boom. But what about reds? What are we going to do here? Now, that could take from harvest until it's in your hand. Boy, that could take 2 years. That could take 3 years. That could take 5 years, depending on what you planted. Right? And then, is there a market for it? Ooh. So, my family decided that they wanted in on this idea. But what we should do is look at planted land and see if we can't purchase it, or at least work out a lease. And this was when I found Yamhill Springs Vineyard in Yamhill, Oregon. And I immediately, foolishly empathized with it. When I saw it was planted in 1988, I said, ooh, my birth year. That's a good sign. And when I saw the absolutely chaotic disarray that the vineyard had been allowed to degrade to, bearing in mind, I was in a back brace where the top of it went up to like my Adam's apple, right? And I still went out to go see this thing. I said, you're just like me, aren't you? You need a second chance too, don't you? And I started thinking of all the ways that I could help these vines. Us humans, we like to think that we own things and that we deserve a bunch of money because we're there. It's not really ours, man. It's not really ours. You just pay for the privilege to take care of it. It's like a car. It's like a driver's license, right? You're not entitled to drive. That's not a right. It's a privilege. Then you have to pay to learn. And then you have to pay to take care of your car. Right? And then you have to pay attention to not kill someone when you're on the road, right? There's a certain base level of responsibility that goes into everything that you do. And lamentably, that just wasn't there at Yamhill Springs. It's not entirely anyone's fault. It's probably a bunch of people's fault. It had had a number of very short-term leases over the last decade. And the result of that is that when infrastructure starts going down, well, okay, we start thinking about the cost of things. Well, if you're only there for a year, why would you spend that money to fix the trellis posts or fix the wiring beyond just sort of stopgap solutions? Why would you do more than the bare minimum as far as replanting goes? And this has been the journey of a lifetime in the span of 6 months. I knew going into this, we could barely afford the lease. And this is even at a discounted rate because of the state that the vineyard has been left to me in. So I knew there was no way I was going to be able to hire labor. There was no way I was going to be able to hire help. And effectively, I was on my own. I have been very blessed to have some volunteers that have come back a lot. In particular, Avery Javier, Griffin Taylor, Connor Smith, my girlfriend Heather. These people have shown up so much. And they have no reason to. There's no money in it. There's no, other than like the odd beer or toke. Like, I don't really have much to give them. And so I'm left feeling that it must be love. It must be friendship. It must be faith in seeing what I see. When I see Yamhill Springs, I see a neglected vineyard, a living thing. And if you treat these living things or think of them as you would a dog or a person, which is dangerous business, right? You shouldn't anthropomorphize these things too much. You shouldn't get your heart too set in them. But if you see them that way, it sometimes makes it easier to conceptualize what you need to do, right? The dog is matted. Let's cut its hair. The dog has a limp. We need to do a little x-ray. Let's see what's going on, right? You have a cough. You go to the doctor. And so over the past 6 months, has it been 6 months? 5 months? Oh my God. Over the past couple of months, I've been really working hard to get to know what's under the hood there. And I started pruning effectively on my own with the intermittent help, especially of those people that I mentioned, but a couple of others. And we're still not at full bud break, but there's a lot of swollen buds out there. There's a lot of fuzzy wuzzies out there on those vines, and it's knocking on the door. I have some pet vinifera vines that I take care of at my house, sort of my little raised bed nursery of 15 odd vines, because that's, I guess, how I am. And those have actually given me open leaves here in McMinnville, but we managed to hit barely, by the skin of our teeth, like by this Sunday, I will be able to say that I've hit the minimum of functional working vines, pruned, tied, ready to go for the season. There's still about another 3 acres to go of vines that are really damaged. So I'm not really expecting to get much out of those in the first place. But I'll probably still be pruning those into June if I'm on my own. But c'est la vie, baby. How's that for a ramble? How do I get into wine?
That is a good story. All right, I got a lot to catch up on here. So I want to go back.
Sure.
You talked about wine kind of hitting you at different points in your life along the way before it became a focus. So tell me about, from your early thoughts of wine, early memories of wine, what was it about wine specifically that appealed to you or found attractive or wanted to learn more about?
At first, the very first thing was like the wanderlust was such a thing. And it was, in the aughts, Argentinian Malbec was hot. It was so in fashion. And I like the idea of Argentina, don't you? And, a lot of those wines were not meant to be, I'm talking about what was available to me, right? I am not talking about like Cheval des Andes, right? But like, a lot of the wine that was available was meant to be yummy, first and foremost. And if you can associate this mental image or try it with empanadas or try it, with a cookout, then bully, good on you. And yeah, I mean, with Uncle Mike, as I still call him for whatever, I haven't talked to the guy in years, we had that sort of game of, well, this is what a Merlot tastes like. Shit, what's a Cab Franc taste like? No way. Oh, this is Zinfandel? Whoa, that tastes different too. And he encouraged me to keep like a little tasting notebook. I found it to be a great distraction with everything else, but also a fun game. And, as far as games go, it was a pretty fun one.
So tell me about the process then of once you started kind of working on exams, working on learning wine at a bigger level. What was the educational process like for you? What did you find helped you learn, helped you understand enough to pass exams?
So with the Court of Masters, it's unguided, right? They give you a syllabus, they give you a grid, and they say, here's all the Cab Sauves that you could be blind tasted on. It could be Coonawarra, it could be Maipo, it could be Casablanca Valley, it could be Sonoma, it could be Left Bank, right? And so it's like this very shotgun approach, right? But being in that group with those people, everybody ended up having, like in any tasting group, everyone has that thing that they love the most, right? Or the wine where, let's say Eddie works at a French restaurant. Well, Eddie's got the most exposure to French wines out of all of us. So guess what? When we have questions about the Loire, we're going to talk to Eddie. Or I worked at the Greek place and had worked before that in Spanish and Portuguese restaurants. And we had a girl from Argentina in the group, and we had other people who loved German wines and were working in Alsatian restaurants. And so honestly, the biggest thing was like just going back and taking our lumps over and over and over and over again, just relentlessly making mistakes with no loss of enthusiasm to keep learning from them amongst each other and holding one another accountable and saying, this is what you missed in your call. Because we would also do our blinds in front of each other in like a time format. You got 4 minutes and go. Tell me about this wine. Okay, it's clear, it's pale, it's yellow, no sign of sediment or gas. Okay, it smells like apples, green apples, tart, crunchy. Okay, this is a cooler climate or at least a cooler vintage. Now, is that petrol? Maybe just a little bit of lime zest. And it kind of feels like investigative journalism or detective work. And you're sort of listening to the wine and asking it questions, and it's asking you questions back. And you're saying, what do the textures tell me? How does it sit on my palate? In the front, on the attack, in the middle, or on the end, the resolution, the finish of the wine? What is this telling me? And am I actually listening to it, or am I trying to force it to be somebody else? And so we'd go through our calls and we'd be like, you described the wine beautifully, but you got to work on your theory, man, because if you had been reading on the difference between Alsatian Riesling and Clare Valley Riesling and Mosel, then you would have nailed that. And that's how we did it. It was, mistakes were welcome, and mistakes were how we learned. I think when I was going to school, we called it the scientific method, but I think the kids call it fuck around and find out these days. So that's what worked for me.
Never thought of those two as synonymous before, but I think you're right. So obviously you had the work, you had worked in food, you had education and work in wine. You had talked about a restaurant someday. You talked about, tell me about I guess, why didn't you pursue? What made you decide not to kind of pursue the SOM path?
Well, I was already feeling burnt out on restaurants, and approaching the end of my days at the Allison, I was working in tasting rooms already, and I just enjoyed that so much more. And I liked not coming home at 1 a.m. And I found that it was significantly more compatible with trying to have a relationship. And believe it or not, work-life balance, even for a workaholic like me, is a thing. And so no, I've always wanted to do my own thing. I think I am an enthusiastic employee, but sometimes a very independent-minded one. which makes me a great colleague and sometimes not a great underling. I just ask too many questions, I think. I poke the bear too much, I think. But yeah, that what originally started as a dream of like, let's have a restaurant, turned into let's have a wine bar, turned into is a wine bar really what I want to do, or is making wine what I want to do? And by the time I had the harvest of 2021 under my belt, the wine bar was no longer something I dreamt of. I dreamt of making wine. And believe me when I tell you that viticulture was the last thing on my mind. This was not how I thought my break would come. This was not how I thought my opportunity would come. But it is how it came. And with a force heretofore unknown to me, let's say, I threw myself with every last ounce of ADHD hyperfocus into learning about viticulture. Picked up every book I could find, every journal, every diary. I have a great book that somebody lent me on Willamette Valley grape growing in 1983, written by Dave Lett. It's awesome. And, you know, now that I've been doing this, at the risk of sounding like, you know, goes to Texas once, yeehaw, right? At the risk of sounding like that, I just don't see there any going back. There is such satisfaction in this. You know, Yamhill Springs is still for sale. I risk losing all of my effort, 100%. I'm contractually protected for the 2024 crop. But if somebody buys it up that wants to put up with all the chaos that's behind it and says, I want to manage it myself, I don't want César to be involved, all right, fair dues. I poured myself into this vineyard. And some people ask me, why do you work so hard on it? Why do you put so much into it? Why do you spend so much of your own money on getting things like a geologist to come out and dig pits and find out what's under the hood? Well, because it's the right thing to do by the vines. And I'll be dead one day. The owners will be, the next owners will be, the next owners will be too. But if we take care of these vines, they will stay around. And our impact in terms of, you know, we all want to make the world a better place, right? I'd like to think so. Maybe that's me being an idealist. I suffer from that. I suffer from idealism big time. But, man, if you could just make these little things in nature stay alive and keep giving. There's a saying that, you know, you give to the land and it'll give back to you. I don't ask for much. I want to pay the bills, sure. I don't need a Ferrari. I don't need a nice yacht. I wouldn't mind one. But, like, that's not why I'm doing this. I'm doing this because I feel that that particular vineyard, if you farm it like an ordinary vineyard, you will get ordinary wines. Full stop. Full stop. If you, and this could apply to anything. You could be at Griotte-Chambertin, and you could be at L'Eclos, you could be at La Tâche, and if you don't farm it like it's your fucking heart on the line, you will not get that wine. And if you do not vinify it like it's your heart and soul in there, where you slow down the sorting line and you go bunch by bunch, well, guess what? You're going to get another cookie cutter wine. And there's no shortage of cookie cutter wines out there, man. That market is super saturated. I don't need to be involved in it. I'm totally fine with making less wine, but making wine that has a story. And that speaks not of me. I'm not the protagonist. I'm just, you know, don't drop the baby. But it speaks the story of these vines. That, fuck me, man, they still give fruit. They're own rooted vines going back to 1988. The old Beaufrere planting's gone. They ripped that out in 2019. There's very few vineyards that are left from the 80s and before that were unrooted. And this thing keeps chugging along. It's a time bomb. I know it won't be around forever. Even if I do end up being on like a 30-year lease with it, or the owner, try not to roll my eyes too hard at that. In less plausible possibility. I think it's a special place. And I hope, beyond hope, that I can convey that through my wines and through the wines that some of my partners will try to make from it.
So I'm going to come back to that because I'm very curious. But I want to back up for a second.
Yeah, by all means.
I want to back up for a second and talk about Oregon. Obviously, you mentioned you came out to California.
Yeah.
You decided to go to Willamette Valley.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me about the wines you'd had, your impressions of Oregon before coming here that made you think this was a place you needed to be.
When you're drinking and you're at these tastings, imaginations really run wild and passions really run high, and especially when you're in a group of people who are already like on board gung-ho about it. So, you'd be tasting and tasting and tasting, and you go, well, this wine's real good. This wine's real, real good. And, you would literally have a Dundee Hills in a flight of 10 Pinots, right? You got some Central Otago, which also wonderful wines. You would have a Sancerre Rouge. You would have a Savigny in there, right? Let's not pretend that in this group we were, all plonking down Richebourgs. You weren't. It was like Savigny Village, all right? And that was the good shit, right? That was like maxing out the budget on that Savigny. But you know what? The Oregon wines always spoke to me. And they carried a weight that was very, we don't miss any parts of the palate, very front, middle, and back, if that makes any sense. But they also had an aromatic complexity that was thrilling. And I felt really that there was something going on. Do I still have mad love for California? Of course. You'd have to be so tribal woo-woo to be an Oregonian wine person and be like, California sucks. I got no use for it. Like, you're ridiculous. California wines are the bedrock of American wine. Start there, say thank you, learn the lessons, and apply your own wisdom and knowledge to what we have here. We are writing our own story. And how exciting is it? We are front row seats, man. We talk about what is the terroir of Oregon? Oh, we won't know that for 20, 30 years. Are you sure? Will we not know it because you just need more evidence? Or is it other than a handful of vineyards, I don't know too many vineyards that have 5, 6, 7 people making wines out of it every single year, right? And once you have a couple of just benchmark examples of this is 100% Jory, this is 100% Belpine, this is 100% Willackenzie, and this is 100% Laurelwood. And if you have enough people pulling from the same place year after year after year, well, and then you start seeing flavor signatures and aroma signatures that coincide. Well, my friend, that is terroir. But to do that legwork is a tall task. I'm not going to bullshit you. That's a lot of work. And you have to have a lot of cooperation going on. And frankly, things change a lot. But I do think it's exciting. And to me, Oregon just excited me in a way that others maybe didn't. And for sure, I can say coming out here in in October of 18 and then back again in March of 19, this was my head west young man moment. As corny as it sounds, this was my America, land of opportunity. This really was that moment. And I felt get here now. Because the worst thing that could happen is that things become so priced out, so luxurious, so expensive that, and I say this with love, but for example, with Napa, things are so expensive that it's, the dragon is eating its own tail, so to speak. And it's so difficult to break in there. And especially if you have diverse ideas. You know, it's controversial when Jackson Family Estates, was it Freemark Abbey just a few years ago, ripped out some Cab Sauv to plant more Sauvignon Blanc. Oh my God, why would you do that? Right? I mean, I think it's a good move. But financially, and it almost always boils down to that, it seems silly. Sauv Blanc is never going to pull the kind of money that Cab Sauv does. But you also risk burnout if you only offer one thing. Napa offers a lot of things. Please don't get me wrong. But by the same token, the Willamette Valley offers a lot of things too. We do make world-class Pinot Noir. But we are a long ways away from being done. And there's so much we can do here. If I were painting with the broadest, most exaggerated strokes, you could say that California, as a state, is a red wine paradise. You can find a nook or a cranny to vinify and farm pretty much any red variety that you want to a pretty good standard. And then, you know, you'll have some white wines that you'll be like, yeah, sure, this is great. Oregon is the other side of that coin. And I still don't know what to make of Washington, but let's stick with Oregon. Like with Oregon, I feel that this is a white wine paradise. I defy you to try to grow a white wine out here, as long as you're taking it seriously and not make something delicious. I've had Grunefeldlinders, Albariños, Chardonnay, Pinot Gris, Riesling, Muscat Autumnal, like Müller-Thurgau, you name it. And they're all of an excellent commercial quality. Did I mention Chardonnay? That's kind of a big one, right? And then with red wines, we have Pinot Noir, which is by and large pretty happy here. We do risk a little bit of, you know, I guess I call them cookie cutter wines. If everybody's going to farm the same way with the same 3 clones, everyone's going to pick the same way and then vinify. We do 25% New French Oak, 10% whole cluster, and everyone's going to do the same thing by a recipe. Then of course, those wines will stagnate. But that's not who I'm talking about. I'm talking about the wines that are made by people who care and who are trying to capture the essence of a vintage, of a piece of land. And, you know, conversations even like things like clones, that's just happenstance. Those are tools in the kit, you know. So yeah, that's what excites me about Oregon. You can do so much here.
Got here in March of 2019.
Yeah.
And you mentioned that you were able to kind of, you had a community. You were able to build a community even with a pandemic hitting a year later. So tell me about starting to build a community here and starting to find the people you wanted to surround yourself with.
Man, people out here are, I'm not going to say universally awesome. That wouldn't be true anywhere. There are definitely some cranky bastards out here. No doubt about it. I can be one, right? There are people who are just waiting for you to make one mistake to just be like, oh, he's an idiot. You can't hire him, or whatever it's going to be, right? But that's not who we're talking about. We're talking about people who are here because they also believe. And people who fundamentally believe in what we're doing have a way of finding one another. I don't know exactly, like, there are some friendships that I have where I'm like, I'm not entirely sure when I met Avery or, you know, some of the others. But I knew that, you know, I would meet him at these industry parties and it was like, oh, that guy's Puerto Rican too. And I heard he's got a soft spot for Riesling. No shit, I have a soft spot for Albariño. We're probably gonna be friends. And, you know, there's something very wholesome about it. Like, to be able to, in your 30s, meet someone hovering over a meat and cheese board. You've got something in your glass, and they got something totally different. And you can tell by the color or the whatever. And to sort of lock eyes with them and just be like almost like your children, and just to be like, do you want to be friends? Yeah, I want to be friends. And I don't know. There's a very genuine nature to people here. And I believe that collaborative spirit that started the industry here, of people sharing their ideas, this is what works, this is what doesn't work, that hasn't changed a bit. There will be some people now, there's more, who am I to speak? I've only been here for 5 years, but here's what I hear. There are more tendencies to be gossipy and snarky about one another's wines and wineries and labels and projects and lives. Consider that part of the growing process. As a valley, right, we've been around since 1965. Thank you, David Lett and Charles Corey and David Adelsheim, right? Big fan of all three of those. And, man, we are almost, in the grand scheme of things, almost in like a preteen phase. Right? And we're still growing into our ears, so to speak. And I think for people who get that this is such an exciting place to be here, such an exciting time to be here, I don't know, call it destiny. I don't have a better word for it. I'm not like a very spiritual person, but I don't have a better way to put that. I think you're just colliding with one another and sort of blinking across the way going, well, this escalated quickly, didn't it? 4 years ago, I was gardening for the first time in my life. Today, I'm pruning vines and looking up the price of Bordeaux mixture and the cost of a used tractor. Like, things change and take a life of their own, and you can dig your heels in and fight it and resist the change, or you can just have faith. And that's where I find myself today.
Describe for me the first time you saw Yamhill Springs.
Woo! So I drove up, and it was early April of 2023. Man, we had a rainy start. Showed up to the vineyard in my car, and I had like some nice guy, broker from like Zillow, who had taken me out there, and I realized pretty quickly that I had brought a knife to a gunfight. And this was not somebody who was experienced in agriculture or commercial agricultural real estate. And when I got out of my car, right, bear in mind, I am in a back brace. This is probably like the second time I'd driven since I'd had the accident, right? So I was very much like taking a lot of Tylenol just to even get there. And the owner was sitting there waiting on the porch. The owner is a very extroverted person, let's say, and is a salesperson, let's say, and was trying to sell me on the virtues of the vineyard right away. And I said, well, do you mind if I go for a little walk around the vineyard and take a peek at the vines? And she says to me, well, you watch out there, because this is all clay. And I said, And she goes, yeah, because all vineyards are on clay. And I said, And I look at myself, and I'm wearing my puffer vest that says like, Vendange 2020, 2023, right? And I'm like, okay, so I can see that I've outed myself as industry. And I was like, I don't think that's true. I said, according to the paperwork, this says that it's like some Jory, but also some bell pine and pea pine gravel and blah, 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 blah. And she's like, oh, yeah. And by the way, we're dry farmed, and we're organic, and we're biodynamic. And I paused, and I said, where's your compost pile if you're biodynamic? Where are your cows? Where are your sheep? Where's your nettles? Where's your chamomile? All right, you're not that. And organic, do you have your receipts? What products are you using? Oh, you don't? Okay. Strong sales pitch, though. So that sort of set the tone, and might I add, she's a delight to work with and has a well-earned reputation as being a colorful character in the valley. That being said, she was gracious enough to allow me to walk through the vineyard and take a look at the vines. And there are trellis posts that have been knocked over by tractor damage that are crushing a number of vines underneath them across the blocks. There is a solid 2 to 3 acres of Pinot Noir 115 that are, theoretically, they should be the best looking vines on the property because they were the only ones on rootstock. They were planted in 2000 and 24 years old, right? You would think these things would be trunks, the width of my thighs, right? They're more like the width of my forearm. And you're thinking something ain't right. And you start looking at them. And I would visit the vineyard a couple of times throughout the year just to see, because the thing what you hear with older vineyard and unrooted, the big P, phylloxera, the louse is coming. And, a lot of vineyard managers and consultants at the very beginning said to me, don't even look at this vineyard. It's going to have phylloxera. It's dry farmed. It's not worth your time. People who had made wines from this vineyard had said, be so careful dealing with this vineyard. There's only X amount of acres that are any good, or there's only one block that's any good, or this, that, or the third. But still, I trundled forward, like I always do. And I must have a really high threshold for banging my head against the wall, is all it really is. But I saw those vines, and I said, oh shit, they look terrible. And I came back in August, wanted to see how the canopies were looking. And yeah, sure enough, in the 115s, I saw a bunch of red leaves in August, and I said, this is virus. This is not phylloxera, this is virus. And I saw by August, there had been some issues with getting labor to the vineyard in 2023. I've heard stories both from the owner and from the previous tenant. They are pretty different. I know which one I believe. And when I got there, I saw heaving heaps of fruit hanging on these vines. And I said, that's not phylloxera. And I saw crazy growth and vegetative growth. I said, this is not phylloxera. This is human. The issue's human. Which is, to quote my doctor when I got diagnosed with ADHD, this is what we call a good news diagnosis. Because human can sometimes be reversed, right? If it's a matter of not caring for it, a little love goes a long way. But what the vineyard needs is what it's getting, which is unpaid dedication. Because to do what I'm doing for a financial value, it's too much. It's too much. I was quoted, $10,000 an acre by one vineyard management company locally. Another quoted me 7 or 8 just because of the disarray that it's in. By the way, that's about 3 times the local going rate. That should speak to you about how far behind the 8 ball we are. There are certain simple vineyard techniques that most vineyards see during the growing season, and this one simply did not. Again, there were some complications between the tenant and the owner that contributed to that. And it wasn't shoot thinned. It wasn't harvested. I can't tell you the shock I felt when I was in Spain. It must have been like 6 p.m, running lab results, checking in on malolactic and VA on the musts that we were fermenting. And my phone starts ringing and ringing and ringing, and it was the owner at Yamhill Springs, and she goes, hey, you gotta help me. I said, what's going on? And she goes, the tenant didn't harvest the fruit. It's all still hanging. You gotta find me a buyer. I said, I'm in Spain. What do you want me to do? She goes, well, it's here and somebody's gotta come get it. I said, okay, help me sell this. How much is your yield? I don't know. What's your bricks? I don't know. What's your pH? I don't know. Are you gonna pick it? No. Are you gonna deliver it? No. Okay, let me take a look at the calendar. Oh my God, it's the second week of October, and I'm about to look like an idiot asking all my friends in the valley if they have a little bit of spare room to try to help you. And of course not. They had already, at second week of October, your interns have all been ground to a pulp. You're finally putting away the destemmer, And here comes some dude on the other side of the world who's like, there might be some, bargain fruit that's probably botrytized and probably has really bad mildew issues. Don't ask me for the chemistry because I don't know. And yes, you'll have to pick it yourself. Do we have a deal? Right? Sizzling offer. But again, even that has proven to be a blessing because I can see and be reminded every day that I'm there what could have been. I mean, 23 should have been a great vintage, especially at that site. Relatively elevated and facing bang southwest with an exposure into this almost like whistling V between the coastal range mountains to the west. So it actually pulls in these almost Van Duzer-esque breezes. Obviously not in the Van Duzer corridor. Please don't kill me in the comments. But it has an effect like that. And it's the kind of vineyard that can do some special stuff. And so, I'm looking at this fruit and I'll see, anything from 8 to 15 bunches per vine still, desiccated, dry little berries still on there that when you squish them between your fingers, they just turn to dust, right? Not even the mold wants them anymore. So, that's pretty bad. But I look at that and I think, well, what would happen in nature? Well, in nature, these would eventually drop. They would get turned over underfoot by deer or by whatever else and get worked into the ground and just become compost and nutrients for the land. Well, I don't know more than nature, and I may not know a lot, but maybe in this case it's a benefit to be able to approach this with the absolute humility of saying, I will listen to people I trust. I've had a lot of people come out of the woodwork and say, oh my God, I can't believe you pruned that block to spurs. What's the matter with you? Well, the matter with me is I don't have time and I don't have trained labor. And they're not gonna fuck up spur pruning. And you know what we need? We need to not fuck these vines up anymore. And so, of course I teach them and I work with them and everything else, but people, as soon as you start doing something, they are really ready to start chiming in with their opinions. Aren't you worried about black rot? Aren't you worried about your own vineyard? Worry about yours. I'll ask you when I have questions. I have books and other mentors that I trust, people who believe in dry farming and, doing things like this. And I'm as long as it's mine, I'll never change that.
So you're throwing yourself into this, obviously, with abandon, I would say. Tell me about the plan for this year. You mentioned the lease. You're basically protected for this year. Mm-hmm. So tell me about the plan for this year for the growing season.
Yeah.
For the cellar season.
My approach has been pretty much determined by my life experiences at other wineries, as well as a cook, and just what I have found that I like as I am. I learned over the years, when it comes to grilling a steak, I just want to hit it with a little salt and pepper, oil so it doesn't stick, and then get it the best kind of fire going for flavor, and that's all I need. I just want to taste the steak for itself. Bear in mind that there's nothing wrong if you've got this amazing spice rub. There's nothing wrong if you've got this great sauce you want to serve it in, or the most killer scalloped potatoes, whatever. Good on you. Different strokes are beautiful, but that's what I've found works for me. And that's what I've found captures my approach to flavor, is if I truly have good ingredients, I have no business getting in the way. And so everything about the growing season is about protecting the integrity of the vines. I am completely okay with having a lower yield if the fruit quality is good. And that, I think, especially for someone starting out, has sometimes led to some puzzled looks. And some people have said to me, if you watered it, you'd get the yields up to 3 or something. And I don't want to. I'm not trying to make oodles and oodles of, watered down meh. think if the gold standard in Pinot Noir is Burgundy, right? That doesn't mean it's the best, but if that's the standard that we're looking at, they don't irrigate there, okay? And that helps tell the story of how the vintage carried across. So even without getting into sustainability reasons, which are, it shouldn't even be a question anymore. The fact is, if that's the standard process for telling the story of vintage, well, I think I already touched on this, but like vintage is about reincarnation of the vines, of the fruit, of the year, and it tells a story. It's like this tattoo. And if you lose that sense of vintage, you have lost your story. And so, no, I will not irrigate. And I have no problem with others who do it. Everyone's going to have their different goalposts. Everyone's going to have their different measurements of success. But for me, that's a very real one. And if I want to compare myself, not compare myself, but if I want to compete, if I want to participate, is probably the better word, in this process with producers that I admire, well, people I look up to have accepted that this is the way to do it. And certainly in Oregon, where we are so blessed that the rains are abundant and perfectly timed. They really don't come in the summer. So it's a privilege. Why wouldn't you make the most of that? I guess is my personal feeling. Other people will feel differently. When it comes time to vinify, I will probably start off with a Pied de Couve, sort of some natural yeasts. I think that there's probably something very exciting brewing over there. And the second that I see things going awry, I have no problem hitting it with a cultured yeast, because my ego and my pride is not more important than the wine tasting well. And, that's a hot button subject for anybody, right? But frankly, it's my first time making a wine under my own name. We haven't even agreed on exactly what the label is going to be called. We have an idea, but I just can't fuck around, man. And not if you're trying to be serious about it. And I like to keep things light and funny, but not my wine. Not my wine.
You mentioned it being the first time making these decisions, making the wine. Tell me about the inputs that matter to you. Obviously, a lot of people have opinions.
Yeah.
Whose are you going to listen to? Who else is involved in the decision?
You know what, man? I love the idea of organics. And my North Star in farming is organics. If it's going to go haywire and it's beyond my control, for example, it could happen this year, right? Because we had some unchecked mildew in 2023. There's a lot latent there. That's the reality. It could happen that to save the crop, I may need to one time use something stronger. I don't like it, but my pride does not mean that, like, I borrowed money to do this. My pride does not mean that I don't get these people their money back. That's like ground level respect for the people who are working with you. And so the same thing is going to apply with my winemaking. Are there people that I really admire? Yeah. The guys that I love the most are Brian at Belpont and John Paul at Cameron, both big on dry farming, of course. John Paul is a mensch, colorful character, no doubt about it. His wines do have Brett, and I fucking hate Brett. So it kind of becomes a little bit of like, what am I doing here? But damn it, I admire the man. I admire him so much. One time I was blessed enough to visit him in his vines, and he says to me, when we started out here, nobody thought Chardonnay would ever work out in the Willamette Valley because it was the old Wente clone, too long of a vegetative cycle to ripen fully for winemaking. We all thought it was thin and anemic, so let's do Pinot Gris. Okay, sure. Well, he soldiered on, and he had his suitcase clones from Corton, And he also had the long-term vision to say, hey, it's foggy here in September and October sometimes. I should get some Nebbiolo in the ground. And his Nebbiolo's been around since '88 too, that magic number. I was very inspired by that. Very inspired by that. There are other winemakers that I do really admire. It shouldn't come as a surprise that Véronique Douan is somebody that I see as a little bit of like a personal hero. I've never met someone who is so damn good at what she does and so humble. She doesn't need accolades. She doesn't need flash. She doesn't need, 500 biographies written about her. She just wants to do the best that she can with what she's got. And her impact is indelible in me. It cannot be denied. Certainly that is at the heart of my vision of winemaking.
So with all of that said, launching into this kind of project with a sort of an uncertain future, uncertain source future, how far out does the plan go right now, and what are sort of some goals you have for the future of the project?
Yeah, I mean, look, with wine, if you're thinking about tomorrow's problems today, you missed the window about a year ago. So there's always been plans B, C, and D. The biggest question mark for this year is I need to find a place to vinify the wines. There are a couple of ideas floating around, but I need to find a place to go to do it. I don't suspect I will need more than 2 or 3 days to complete my own personal harvest. Our objective is to sell around 90% of the fruit. And just keep, 5 or 10 tons, hopefully not 10, but hopefully it'll be 5 tons and less to ourselves and be able to do it. Avery's helping me out with that, Avery Javier. And we'll see whoever else is along for the journey on that one. There is one very intriguing storyline that started up a week or so ago, and there is a very nice couple from Portland that wants to buy the property outright. If you're listening, I hope it happens. But they seem like lovely people, and they have floated the idea of doing a joint partnership, maybe letting me farm it for 10, 15, 20 years into the future. They have their things that they'd like to see happen over there too, but joke's on them. I wanted to do the same thing too. Haha. So even though, they almost brought it up to me like, well, do you think a little bit of Barbera would work? Yes, man, I do. Yes, I do. Come back for my next TED Talk on all the other varieties that I think would work really well out here. Not as replacements for Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, but as additions to, what's that saying? Love doesn't divide, it multiplies. Yeah.
So tell me about then, given all that and given sort of the speed with which all this has happened for you recently, long-term goals. What is next?
I would really love to, once I've got these wines in barrel, we're also purchasing a little bit of fruit this year. So we're taking it pretty seriously. I am purchasing some Albarino fruit. Fingers crossed, touch wood, that it's going to be a steady growing season and we don't have any problems with flowering or anything else. And so I'll probably make a little bit of that. Then we need to find a place to house things. But I would like this to be the opening salvo in our story as winemakers. If for whatever reason we're not at Yamhill Springs in the future, you know what, man? If we could help push the stone along to get it to healthy, I would be so proud of that forever. If I can be around long enough to see it blossom into what I think it really is deep down inside, that would be a privilege and an honor. Because it's in service of something much larger than myself. And I guess I learned along the way that if I don't work towards something that I feel has purpose, I won't be happy. I need to be doing something that makes me feel like there's purpose in my work. So, we'll try to work with vineyards like Yamhill Springs, I guess. We'll continue to try different things, and I don't want to make any like firm platitudes about what we will or won't do, but I do know that we will be around. And ask me in a few years, and let's see how that's changed. I would have felt much more bullish on this a couple of years ago, but after the last 4 years, just Hakuna Matata. Make good wine, don't drop the baby. Hakuna Matata.
You talked a little bit about sort of initial impressions of Oregon, building your community here. So tell me about, as you look ahead for Oregon, the industry, what do you see on the horizon? What excites you? Are there things that scare you?
Oh, man.
What do you kind of see unrolling?
Oh, man. I'm so excited about this next generation of winemakers coming through. Shit. So I have two guys who I offered a deal to as far as Yamhill Springs. And I said, you guys are millennials. You guys are talented. You guys have really good work histories. And I feel like you guys would do justice to this vineyard. So I offered them each a sublease. If they farmed an acre each, or a half acre in one guy's case, I would sell them the fruit for much less. Because I'm so excited about this next generation that's coming up. The thing is, I look at people like Jason Lett, whose wines I really, really admire, as much as his father's. And, I can only imagine with his dad being who his dad is, But his wines are fabulous. And they're so true. And, that's another winemaker that I really, in my bones, admire. And this generation of winemakers that's coming through in vignerons is so privileged, is so lucky to be able to look at these sort of like big brother, big sister, auntie, uncle kind of relationships all around the valley. And to be able to say, like, look what they built. And we are right here with bricks and mortar in hands. And, like, how exciting is the growth of these sparkling wines in the valley? How exciting is the growth of, we see so many divergent interests in terms of like, these are the alternate variety festival, this is the natural wine festival, this is the Scooby-Doo festival, whatever it's going to be. And that there's such real passion for it. We're all, as an industry, shitting bricks about sales going down, but hey man, if you're focused on quality over quantity, who cares? You're going to have the same people coming back no matter what because they believe in quality. And that might mean less butts in seats, but they're loyal butts in seats. And they're people who get it and who will support your family. So I think looking around the world, every time that places like, say the Veneto or Chianti have expanded their region to get more quantity in, it's never been a good business decision. Never. So it just dilutes the product. Just keep your eyes on the prize. Oregon's always been about quality over quantity. And, we take a look at statistics. I like sports, so I gobble that shit up. But, in the top 100 wines in the world, from, publications like Wine Enthusiast, Wine Advocate, things like that, Oregon wines are way well represented. Like 10%. Well, we barely make 10% of the wine in the United States. Think about that. That's incredible. And that's all down to the fact that we believe in small here. I think for the most part, we believe in you don't have to be 200,000 cases to be successful out here. You can be doing it at 5,000. You can be doing it at maybe 2,000 if it's, bespoke enough. But, you can live a good life doing this. And so, yeah, I'm very excited about the people who are coming through and their passions and their interests, and people who've done harvests in places like South Africa, New Zealand, Tasmania, bringing in those ideas as well. And sky's the limit. I really believe that.
All right. Last question for you.
Sure.
You started off talking about reinvention and the reinvention of yourself over and over again, and I think that's shown through in the interview here today. So tell me about this current version of yourself, the most recent reinvention. What is the good part of it? What are you happy about right now? What gives you sort of hope for the project in the future?
This version of me is a lot like other versions of me, just always looking to improve. I'm not perfect. I'm not even close. And, there have been times where I really, trigger warning, there have been times where I've really come close to just things getting really dark, right? And I've had idealized thoughts. I've been in abusive relationships. I've made mistakes of 100% of my own fault in doing. But I don't let those be the things that define me. And whenever I do land on concrete, I don't let that define me either. So I continue to chip and chip and chip relentlessly. To paraphrase a bit, I don't think that I am Michelangelo in the block of marble, but I think the best me is still in the block of marble, being chipped away at. And I think the best Yamhill Springs is the block of marble being chipped away at. You just can't give up on it. No matter how many hands are putting on there with a chisel and trying to take it in different directions, it keeps growing. I keep growing. I don't know what's coming next for me. I think it would be foolish to try to, at this stage, so many changes, so many things. I don't know what's next. I know how I'll probably take it. I'll probably take it in stride and try to find a way to make a positive out of everything, try to make it work for me. And that's what excites me the most, is that I haven't lost that relentlessness. And my constant companion has been there. It's been wine. So I owe a lot of gratitude to it. I think wine saved my life. And I mean that, as cheesy as it may sound. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. This is fantastic, and what a note to end it on. Anything I didn't ask that I should have? Anything we didn't cover that you'd like to cover?
I like puppies.
You like puppies and sports
and kitties. I like dogs and cats. Yeah.
Cool. This is turning into a dating profile now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
No, I'm happily taken. It's a profile. It's just a profile.
Thank you so much for sharing your time with us, sharing your stories and your thoughts with us, and go ahead and let you off the hook. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.